Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. Okay, so living wage we'll come back to at 12:30 as agreed. We've done item 11, the Water Management Zone Committee, so now we'll move to item 12, Urban Development Indicators, the Quarterly Monitoring Report.
Just a question, Mr Chair. So living wage, that's fine at 12:30, and it is lunch at 12:45? Yes. So that's 15 minutes?
1 till 2.
No.
1 till 2.
Building lunchbox are coming at 12:45.
No, it's just that. Yeah, it can be any time.
Okay.
Yes, the commitment that was made by the Mayor was that we would start living wage at 12:30, just so that the people in the public gallery have got some expectation as to when we'll do that. But yeah, thank you. Okay, so item 12, Urban Development Indicators. So this is a quarterly monitoring report. Is there any staff comment on this as we move into this item?
As you're aware, the National Policy Statement came into on urban development capacity came into effect on December last year, and it imposes several requirements on councils, including the requirement to monitor urban development indicators. So the Greater Christchurch Partnership has started doing that monitoring, and that has culminated in the monitoring report, the first monitoring report attached to this report. That has been considered by the Partnership Committee, upon which the Mayor and Councillors Clearwater and Templeton sit, and they resolved to endorse that monitoring report and to refer it to all the partner councils for their endorsement and publication. So we're looking for that today, and also we're essentially seeking a delegation to staff to continue to monitor in that general way, in that general framework, on a quarterly basis in accordance with the National Policy Statement, whilst making improvements to it over time. We emphasise that this is our first attempt at monitoring and preparing the monitoring report, and it is being informed by various sources, and some of the data is very limited or hasn't been tested for its robustness. So there's some caution around the data that's in there. But despite those limitations and the reliability, potential reliability issues, we're recommending that it's a good starting point and it should be endorsed.
Indeed, so thank you for that. I just had a question, and maybe it just relates to my own inability to understand something. Paragraph 3 of the staff recommendations, I didn't really understand what that meant. Does that mean that this quarterly report won't be reported back to Council in future? Or does it mean that there's work will be done by the Greater Christchurch Partnership Committee that hasn't been done in this case? I didn't really understand what Clause 3 was meaning.
We're trying to get consistency with the resolutions between all the partnering agencies, so that's where that's come from. But essentially what it's suggesting is that the monitoring report is as it is. It will go, it'll be published. It is already on the Greater Christchurch Partnership website. But it just enables staff to continue to update that on a quarterly basis, and not have to come back every quarter to Council.
Okay, no, that makes some sense. Yeah. So will this be reported to Council on a quarterly basis, notwithstanding? Like, we'll continue to see this report?
That's not the intention. Or will it
be just put up on the website and it's up to us to go and look at it?
It'll be on the intention is that it would just be on the website, but we do report on land supply issues, I think, on an annual basis generally, so this work will feed into that reporting.
All right, so I'm sensing that there may be some around the table have got a particular view on that, and I'm glad that you've explained it clearly so that people are able to take a view. So we'll now move to questions. So Glenn and then Yanni. Glenn.
Thank you for this information. A lot of it I think is very good, and we're looking to set up a housing subcommittee, so it could be a place for it to land as well, given a lot of it is over housing. I just have a couple of questions over it. One is on page 309 under notes, and it says about the HAM, housing affordability measure. It calculates what the residual income would be after housing costs if they were to buy a MOS. So what is that residual income? Is it 70%, given that affordability is based on 30% of your gross income?
I may defer that to the technical people who are involved in that, but my understanding is that there is a magic number, that this is an MB indicator,
Right.
And the magic number, I understand, is to have something like $662 left over after housing costs are taken out. So that's the magic number. If you didn't have $662 after those housing costs, you would be you'd be in that. It's unaffordable.
Probably the percentage, because it'd be good to match this up with our own housing policy, which the council adopted. So what, percentage that 600 actually represents would be good to know.
Yeah, it's about trying to match it with other council, Selwyn and Waimak as well. So we need to. That's why we're using the MB one, because they're providing data across all the councils in a consistent manner.
So if I may follow up, can you give me a percentage on what that residual figure is? Is it 70%?
We haven't done that one.
We can look to investigate that further.
Okay,
we don't
great.
Have that
And if I could ask just another, on the next 310, there's the first bullet point there, down towards the bottom, says other factors that may have an impact on the reliability of this measure, such as only using the lower quartile dwelling price. That's actually what we have in our policy. And, for lower quartile affordability, yet it's being seen as having an impact on the reliability. I just wonder why that's there.
Any comment, Ben?
Because to me, that's a key indicator.
The rationale behind it is not clearly understood by us at this point, and we have got questions that have gone back to MB about how it's arrived at and what it actually means. So that's why we've cautioned use of it. MB have asked us to, or prepared a number of indicators to put in this report, which is what the partnership have done. So just understanding that a bit more is on their agenda. So
could be their understanding and ours of affordability will differ. So okay. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So Yanni.
Oh, thanks. I see on page 15, it's 314, that you say additional indicators to consider for future monitoring, and in there you've got indicators to help improve understanding regarding housing affordability and home ownership levels. I'd be really keen to see some indicators around home ownership and also who owns how much. It's one thing that we don't have any information on. So, in terms of, I don't know if we can get information around, for example, how many houses and homes are being owned by investors versus not, or how many properties per person, and what the bands are, and also whether we can monitor the density of social housing that's existing and what the trends are. So I just wanted to ask if we can get some indicators around that.
yeah, it is really difficult to get reliable information on a lot of these things. So it will be ongoing dialogue with central government in particular to try and pull together good sources of information for those sort of things to get a good picture. So we'll certainly look at what we can do. It is quite difficult to get information on how many are investors, because who is an investor, for instance? There are, it's really quite difficult to get some certainty around that.
Just through the chair, I thought the government had brought in sort of new banking regulations around investors for housing, so that the bank should have some quite good data now that we didn't have previously. But if
we'll certainly ask the question.
You'll look at it. Okay.
Yep.
The social housing, I mean, the size of social housing that's being built and the location and the density, that should be pretty easy.
Is that something that's been done through the...
Yeah, so part of the housing assessment, there's part of the MPS that these monitoring indicators will look at social housing and what's being provided and what has been demanded. So we'll pick up that kind of information.
And that can include geographic and spatial mapping.
Yeah.
So this monitoring of indicators is one of the requirements of the National Policy Statement. Another requirement is to prepare a housing and business land capacity assessment, and that can involve looking at the distribution and type of housing and location and where the demand is and that sort of thing.
Right. And so just the final question was around what it seems to indicate is that we have a huge oversupply of industrial and commercial and possibly residential land. So is there any sort of outcome of, now we know that this is the case, is there any sort of outcome in terms of what we should be doing either through land zoning, district planning policies, in terms of provision of infrastructure or other sort of interventions to deal with this issue?
So in terms of this report and the data that's in it, I guess another caution about it is that, and Jason perhaps can explain more about the vacant land register, but it doesn't look about, it looks at total and total housing, but it hasn't gone as far as working out whether or not that capacity is feasible as required under the National Policy Statement. So that piece of work will be undertaken as part of the Housing and Business Land Capacity Assessment. So it'll look at total supply of business and housing land and then test whether it's feasible. So these numbers could come down quite a bit, and it's only once we understand the feasible supply number, if you like, that we can then start asking the questions in terms of what does that mean and what should we do, and how should we respond to it.
Just a clarification on that.
Sure.
Haven't we done that through the district plan review? We've spent a huge amount of money, analysis, expertise, and understanding where land can be zoned, and I would have thought that those decisions would have been based on the feasibility of it. So how is this different to what we've just done?
The requirements under the National Policy Statement are much more onerous, and some feasibility work was undertaken as part of the district plan review, but not in terms of industrial and commercial, a little bit in terms of residential. So it's more onerous requirements under the policy statement, and we're looking at a different time frame as well, because the National Policy Statement asks us to look out 30 years, whereas the district plan land supply is 10 years effectively. So
if I may add as well, that the feasibility that the NPS directs us to assess is actually developer feasibility. So it's not feasibility of the land being zoned or infrastructure or any other council-related type work. It's actually about whether a developer will make their 20 or 30% margins over the top when developing that land. So that's a piece of work that I think there was some work done at that level in district plan review. But this is quite specifically directed at developer feasibility from the NPS point of view.
Okay.
So that'll be looked at and reported back to council as part of the Housing and Business Land Capacity Assessment at the end of the year. And
there's no, there's no environmental analysis as part of the environmental feasibility of?
There is it does factor into feasibility for a start, in terms of, you know, geotech, that sort of thing. It's quite comprehensive, and also the land has to be serviced, so infrastructure capacity and all of those sort of things come into it as well.
Thank you. Vicky.
Just the stuff on page 309, 310, 310 particularly, of our report, on the HAM buy index, the HAM buy index on who can buy their first house, and just the what it tracks and how it tracks it. And then your paragraph that says at the start of page 310, while the improvement in housing affordability is positive, the level of improvement could have been considered small against the significant increase in land supply, which has almost been a religious sort of credo of the government in terms of land supply equals affordability. And then you go on to indicate a couple of other major problems with the indicator. It's based on 100% mortgage, whereas you can't buy a house with 100% mortgage for even if you're living in it. And the fact that they had the interest rate wrong, and a range of other things. And so I'm wondering actually how helpful it is, because it seemed to me when I read it that it was based on an interesting MB theoretical formula which was probably derived in Auckland, and then when you applied it here, the theory didn't work and the actual numbers didn't actually, they hadn't given you the right numbers either. So I was actually quite concerned about it.
Yeah, we don't disagree with you on that in terms of the caution that should be applied to it, but it is what MB have developed for this particular purpose, for monitoring this measure. But my understanding is that the partnership monitoring team who are working to prepare the next monitoring report, will continue to have dialogue with MB around the appropriateness of that indicator and what it means.
So all of our affordability measures are measured on incorrect percentages, incorrect interest rates, and a land supply theory which may or may not be true outside of Auckland. That's a wee bit worrying.
And that's what's
well, the land supply information that we've got is specific.
No, I know ours is quite real, but what you indicate on page 310 at the top is that actually, given the huge amount of greenfields and brownfields extra zoning, the affordability should have come down according to the theory of land supply equals affordability of housing.
It certainly does raise questions.
Quite a lot.
In terms of that relationship, but that's a lot of these indicators do. They raise more questions than anything, and that's why we need to continue to work on them. I mean, there's a lot of interdependencies between them, and you can't look at one in isolation necessarily for another, and there's a lot more analysis that will need to go into it. I mean, it is a first start, and it really is pulling together a whole lot of disparate information to comply with the MPS requirement, and the view is, and the expectation of central government is that it is a first step, and to build on that and get better at it and understand it and get better information over time. So it is a product of its time, and I can't really say any more than that.
So given that, clearly this is reported to Council as the first quarterly monitoring report. The intention, clearly from what we just heard about paragraph 3, is that future reports wouldn't be reported to Council, although given the comments that you've just made around this being a work in progress and a report that's very much still in development, and there will be improvements and so on, what's the thinking around reporting this one to Council and not reporting future reports, I'm assuming, to this Council or other councils?
We certainly could do that. I guess the view is not much will have changed. When we do when the partnerships, clarify this is a partnership undertaking, where's the next report, not much will have changed. So coming back in a few months to say exactly the same thing. I mean, it may well be that a longer reporting time frame might be
maybe on a 6-monthly basis?
6-monthly or annual basis, yeah.
4 monthly, 3 times a year. And I mean, a little bit like the zone committees who we heard from earlier, we did have them coming to talk to us every 2 months, and now the thinking is that quarterly might be good. If we went every 4 months and then we found that that was too much, we could always drop back to 6 monthly as there was a level of confidence that there weren't going to be major changes, and as there was a level of confidence around the content of the report.
Just bearing in mind that this is a quarterly report, so...
yes, of course, yeah. So really 3 months or 6 months would be the choice. Yeah, okay. Sarah? So a suggestion that we do continue to receive, so that the quarterly report continue to be reported to Council, and if at some point we realise that there's minimal change, or we're so comfortable with what's in there that we no longer require that, obviously that's a change that could be made at that time. But initially, to bring that report to Council quarterly by way of information, I don't think we're looking for... Are we looking for the ability to endorse that?
No, but I think if we're, like, water is one of our key things, housing is one of our key things, so I think getting this information, I mean, there's really interesting information in here. For example, the fact that actually the land costs in Selwyn and Waimak are not radically lower than in Christchurch City, which is really interesting and probably goes against everything that people think. But there's just a massive information. I enjoyed reading it. I thought it was a really interesting report, even if I didn't believe most of what MB's indexes were based on. And I think getting it every 3 months would be really helpful.
So maybe if we add a paragraph 4 here, that says that that future quarterly monitoring reports, the Council requests that future
Mr Chair, just the quarterly reports will be reported back to the partnership on a quarterly basis, and we should be reporting what happens at the partnership or the minutes of the partnership back to council. So perhaps the need for an additional resolution might be superfluous if that is already in place.
So you would bring this report to us as part of that reporting which is already occurring?
Well, I think the idea, and we discussed this last week at the ITE committee, there's a few regional and sub-regional committees which we've got a number of councillors that sit on, and the need to make sure that whatever happens at those committees is formally reported back to council or the appropriate committee within council, and that the Greater Christchurch Partnership is one of those, yes. And we would be looking to report the minutes back from that back to council or perhaps the strategy and what's that?
The minutes just say that they adopted the report.
Yes, yes, they would.
So, well, that's not helpful.
I think so. You're talking about wanting to endorse it.
Well, just to read it anyway, to have it on the agenda, so that if we've got questions about what's happening in housing in Christchurch, we can ask them. Because
well, we would certainly look to attach that as well, so it wouldn't just be the minutes itself. So yeah.
So maybe if we had here request that future monitoring reports be reported to council on a quarterly basis, and if the method of doing that was by way of the existing reporting which you're already doing or that's already happening from that from the Greater Christchurch Partnership, then that would fulfil the resolution in any case, wouldn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. So if we just keep it broad, request that the quarterly monitoring report be reported to council on a quarterly basis, and if that's by way of reporting that comes out of the Greater Christchurch Partnership, well, so be it. Therefore, there is no duplication. It just means that the sentiment that's been expressed by Vicky and by Sarah is picked up, so that we actually actively have this put in front of us, rather than needing, for example, to go to the website and look at it. I think that sort of picks up the thinking. Glenn?
Yeah. Thank you, Andrew. I'm just thinking, like, there's a lot of feeling over this. Could it go through, say, the proposed housing subcommittee for a good going over? Because we have our own measures of affordability which don't match that, for instance, or not at this stage. And we might want to find a way to have a kind of like a conversation over that, and then we take it.
Yeah. So I mean, housing's only a part of this, and of course the housing subcommittee is perfectly entitled to put on its agenda whatever it wants to put on its agenda. So, you know, if you wanted to have a discussion about this or any other report, as long as it sits within your terms of reference, there's no reason why you couldn't put that on your agenda. All right, great. Any further questions?
Note that the house size across all 3 districts has actually decreased over the last 10 years, which is almost counterintuitive to what you would have expected. It's actually interesting. Yeah.
All right, well, thank you very much indeed for the answers to the questions. Certainly there's been some useful discussion there. So we've got a resolution in front of us. Do we have a mover? Glenn will move. Aaron will second. All those, is there any debate? All those in favour? Against? That's carried.